There's something haunting about the way an ancient statue seems to stare right through you, as if the stone itself holds a secret it's waiting to reveal. Picture this: you're standing in a dimly lit temple, your fingers brushing against the weathered surface of a sculpture carved thousands of years ago. The details are worn by time, but the presence is undeniable. This isn't just a block of rock shaped by human hands. It's a portal to another world, a frozen moment where the divine touched the earthly. How did artists, working with nothing but simple tools and boundless imagination, manage to capture the ineffable, the whispers of gods, the weight of eternity, the very essence of mysticism, in something as solid and unyielding as stone? That's the mystery we're unraveling today. From the towering sphinxes of Egypt, their inscrutable smiles hinting at knowledge beyond our grasp, to the serene Buddhas of the East, their eyes half closed in eternal meditation, these sculptures aren't just art. They're coded messages from the past. Each chisel marks a deliberate choice to bridge the gap between the seen and the unseen. Think about the skill it took to transform rough stone into something that feels alive, something that seems to breathe with spiritual energy. These artists weren't just craftsmen, they were translators of the sacred, working in a language of symbols and gestures that spoke directly to the soul. So what hidden truths lie buried in these silent sentinels of history? How did a sculptor's hands, guided by faith or vision, turn cold rock into a vessel for the divine? Over the next few minutes, we'll travel across continents and centuries, piecing together the techniques, the rituals, and the sheer audacity of those who dared to carve the intangible into existence. This isn't just a story about art, it's a journey into humanity's oldest quest to make the invisible visible, to give form to the formless, and by the end, you'll never look at an ancient statue the same way again. Stone wasn't just a practical choice, it was a sacred one. Imagine standing in a world without steel or machinery, where the earth itself offered the most enduring material human hands could shape. Ancient cultures didn't carve stone simply because it was available. They chose it because it whispered of permanence, of something beyond the fleeting lives of mortals. In the eyes of the Egyptians, granite and limestone weren't just rocks. They were fragments of eternity capable of housing the divine. A statue wasn't merely an image of a god. It became a vessel, a place where the spirit could dwell. That's why the Great Sphinx, carved from the living bedrock of the Giza Plateau, feels less like a monument and more like a guardian, its gaze fixed on the horizon for thousands of years. But this reverence for stone wasn't unique to Egypt. The Mayans, too, saw mountains as sacred beings, and their temples' towering pyramids clad in limestone were designed to mirror those holy peaks. To shape stone was to commune with the gods, to transform the raw chaos of nature into order and meaning. Even in the earliest days of human creativity, this connection was already taking form. Take the Venus of Willendorf, a tiny figurine carved from oolitic limestone over 25,000 years ago. She's no lifelike portrait, but her exaggerated curves and faceless head suggest something deeper than realism, a symbol of fertility, of life's mysterious cycles, etched into something that would outlast generations. What's striking is how these cultures, separated by continents and centuries, arrived at the same conclusion: stone held power. Maybe it was the way it endured, resisting time's erosion while wood rotted and clay crumbled. Or perhaps it was the act of carving itself, a ritual of patience and precision that mirrored the slow unveiling of spiritual truths. Every strike of the chisel was a dialogue between the artist and the unseen, a way of coaxing the sacred out of the mundane. From the colossal Buddhas of Bamiyan to the intricate jade carvings of ancient China, stone became the silent language of the divine, a medium that could carry the weight of human devotion across millennia. And that's the real magic here. These sculptures weren't just art for art's sake, they were bridges. A Mayan stela covered in intricate glyphs wasn't just a record of kings, it was a conduit for ancestors to speak. An Egyptian statue with its rigid symmetry and piercing eyes wasn't just a likeness, it was a doorway for gods to step into the world. Stone's very durability made it the perfect keeper of secrets, a material that could hold the intangible and make it tangible. So when we look at these ancient works today, we're not just seeing skill or craftsmanship, we're witnessing the moment humanity first dared to ask, how do you carve the wind? How do you give shape to the unseen? The answer, it seems, was always in the stone. Every fold of a robe, every curl of a lotus petal, every carefully placed hand gesture in these ancient sculptures was a deliberate choice, a silent language waiting to be deciphered. Take the Buddhist statues of Southeast Asia, where the slightest tilt of a head or curve of a smile isn't just artistic flair, it's a roadmap to enlightenment. The lotus flower, rising pristine from muddy waters, isn't merely decoration, it's a visual mantra for spiritual rebirth, carved over and over into temple walls from India to Cambodia. And then there's the third eye, that enigmatic mark on the forehead of Hindu and Buddhist deities. It's not just a symbol of wisdom, it's an invitation to look beyond the visible world, a challenge etched in stone. But symbolism wasn't confined to the East. In Egypt, a single gesture could speak volumes. The ankh, that looped cross clutched in the hands of pharaohs and gods, wasn't just a hieroglyph, it was a promise. When a statue held it, fingertips brushing the symbol of eternal life, the message was clear. This figure wasn't just a representation of divinity, it was a conduit for its power. Even the rigid posture of Egyptian art, with its forward-facing figures and locked knees, carried meaning. That wasn't a lack of skill, it was a deliberate choice, a way to show the subject existing outside of time, unyielding as the stone itself. What's fascinating is how these symbols crossed cultures without a shared language. The serpent, feared in some traditions, became a crown on the brow of Egyptian pharaohs, a symbol of protection and sovereignty. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl wove together earth and sky in a single coiled form. These weren't random artistic choices, they were a universal shorthand, a way to compress entire cosmologies into a single glance. A worshipper might not read sacred texts, but they could read a statue the way its hands formed a mudra, the way its feet crushed demons, the way its gaze seemed to hold the weight of the cosmos. And that's the true genius of these artists. They knew stone could speak louder than words. When a Mayan king commissioned a stela, every glyph and ornament was a political and spiritual statement, designed to awe commoners and please gods alike. When a Greek sculptor draped Athena's robe in precise folds, those rippling lines weren't just realism, they mirrored the order she brought to chaos. Even materials held meaning. Jade in China wasn't chosen for its beauty alone, but because its cool touch was thought to hold the essence of heaven. So the next time you stand before an ancient statue, don't just look, listen. That slight smile on a Khmer Buddha's lips, it's not serenity, it's the hint of a secret, the whisper of a truth too vast for words. The coiled serpent around a Shiva statue isn't just ornamentation, it's the universe in motion, frozen in stone. These artists weren't just carving figures, they were writing sermons in a language of symbols, a code that still resonates across centuries. And if we lean in close enough, we might just catch what they've been trying to tell us all along. Think about the sheer audacity of shaping granite with nothing but a copper chisel. No power tools, no diamond-tipped blades, just human strength and patience honed over lifetimes. Ancient sculptors didn't just work with stone, they danced with it, their tools an extension of their hands, each strike a conversation between artist and material. In Egypt, craftsmen used dolerite balls harder than the granite they pounded to slowly, painstakingly smooth surfaces to a mirror finish. Every groove in a pharaoh's sarcophagus, every curve of a goddess's cheek, was born from this rhythmic, almost ritualistic repetition. The Olmecs faced an even greater challenge. Their iconic colossal heads, some weighing over 20 tons, were carved from volcanic basalt using nothing but rudimentary stone tools. Imagine the precision required to shape a face that towers above you, using only abrasives and brute force. Yet somehow, they captured expressions so vivid, so alive, that modern archaeologists still debate whether these were portraits of rulers or deities. The tools were simple, but the vision was anything but. Greek sculptors, too, turned limitation into artistry. Iron chisels allowed them to create the illusion of wind-kissed fabric in marble, each fold of a robe seeming to flutter in an eternal breeze. But here's the twist, they often left the final polish incomplete, knowing sunlight would catch the rough texture and make the stone glow, a deliberate choice to blur the line between sculpture and spirit. Even the abrasives they used, like emery from the island of Naxos, were selected not just for practicality, but for their symbolic ties to the earth's gifts. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was alchemy. In India, artisans employed a technique called lost wax casting to create bronze deities so detailed, you can see the pulse of a vein in a wrist or the delicate arch of a brow. The wax model melted away, leaving behind a hollow space filled with molten metal, a metaphor, perhaps, for how the physical could give way to the divine. And in China, jade carvers spent years on a single piece, grinding the stone with quartz sand until it sang under their fingers. The slower the process, the more sacred the result. What's striking is how these tools, so basic by today's standards, became sacred objects in their own right. A sculptor's mallet wasn't just a tool, it was a bridge between worlds, its strikes echoing like prayers. The abrasives that smoothed rough edges were thought to carry prayers into the stone, grain by grain. Even the dust that filled the air was seen as sacred, the literal residue of creation. So the next time you marvel at an ancient statue, remember, what you're seeing isn't just artistry. It's the ghost of countless hours of hands guiding simple tools with impossible precision, of a dialogue between the tangible and the transcendent. These artists didn't just carve stone, they carved time itself, leaving behind whispers of the divine in every chip and groove. And somehow, with nothing but copper, iron, and unshakable faith, they made the eternal tangible. The choice of stone was never arbitrary. It was a sacred decision, as deliberate as the first strike of the chisel. For the Greeks, the luminous glow of white marble wasn't just aesthetic, it was celestial. When they carved Apollo or Athena from Parian stone, quarried from mountains whispered to be the home of nymphs, they weren't just shaping rock. They were releasing a divine essence trapped within the earth. That marble's translucency, catching the light like human skin, made gods feel startlingly present, as if they might step off their pedestals and speak. Half a world away, the Olmecs and Maya saw black basalt differently. To them, its volcanic origins tied it to the underworld, a conduit for communicating with ancestors and deities of the night. Their colossal heads, hewn from this dark stone, weren't just monuments, they were anchors between realms, their solemn faces gatekeepers of secrets. Even the weight of the material mattered. The heavier the stone, the more it grounded spiritual energy in the physical world. Then there's jade, a stone so revered in ancient China that emperors were buried in suits stitched with thousands of jade plaques. Its coolness against the skin, its toughness resisting scratches, even the musical tone it made when struck, all were seen as proof of its immortality. Carving a bi-disc, that flat circle with a central hole, wasn't just artistry. It was creating a portal for the soul to journey through after death. The longer a craftsman labored over jade, the more spiritual potency it was believed to hold, as if time itself could be kneaded into the stone. Even the act of quarrying was steeped in ritual. In Egypt, the red granite of Aswan wasn't just durable, its hue echoed the desert sun at dawn, symbolizing rebirth. Workers would pour libations into the rock before cutting, asking permission to extract its power. In India, sandstone from the Vindhyas was chosen for temples because its layers mirrored the strata of the cosmos, turning entire buildings into maps of the universe. What's extraordinary is how these beliefs transcended geography. The Inuit carved talismans from soapstone, soft enough to shape but enduring as the Arctic ice. The Easter Islanders chose volcanic tuff for their moai, believing the porous stone absorbed mana, the life force of ancestors. Every culture, it seems, understood that stone wasn't passive. It was a collaborator, whispering its origins and intentions to those who knew how to listen. So when you see an ancient statue, remember, its material is the first clue to its meaning. That Greek marble's whiteness isn't just purity, it's the light of Olympus captured. The obsidian mirror in a Maya priest's hand isn't merely polished rock. It's a window to the spirit world. These sculptors didn't just work with stone, they honored its soul, letting the very earth dictate the form of the divine. And in doing so, they gave us not just art but a language of the sacred written in the bones of the planet. To carve a god from stone was never just a profession. It was a calling, a sacred trust between the artist and the unseen. Across civilizations, sculptors weren't seen as mere makers. They were intermediaries, their hands guided by forces greater than themselves. In India, the Shilpins didn't just follow technical rules from the Vishnudharmatara Purana. They underwent rituals to purify their bodies and minds before touching chisel to stone. A single misplaced stroke wasn't just a mistake. It was a spiritual offense, a disruption of the divine blueprint they were meant to reveal. The statue's proportions, the angle of a deity's gaze, even the timing of the carving process were all dictated by ancient texts, as if the gods themselves had whispered the instructions into human ears. This reverence for the artist's role as a channel wasn't confined to the East. In medieval Europe, the master masons who built cathedrals like Chartres or Notre Dame rarely signed their work. Their names weren't erased by time, they were willingly withheld, a deliberate act of humility. To these craftsmen, the soaring arches and intricate gargoyles weren't expressions of personal genius. They were prayers in stone, offerings to a higher power. The mason's compass and square weren't just tools. They were sacred symbols representing the union of heaven and earth. Even the guilds that trained these artists operated like spiritual orders, guarding secrets passed down not as techniques but as sacred trusts. What's striking is how this belief in divine inspiration crossed cultural boundaries. In West Africa, the Yoruba sculptors of Ife worked in near-trance states, believing the Orishas, the spirits, spoke through their hands. The serene bronze heads they created, with their idealized beauty and hauntingly lifelike detail, were thought to house the very essence of divinity. Similarly, the Aztec tlacuilos, or artist scribes, didn't merely depict gods. They invoked them, using pigments mixed with sacrificial blood to infuse their creations with life. The act of carving or painting became a kind of possession, where the artist's individuality faded to let something greater emerge. This mystical connection between creator and creation explains why so many ancient sculptures feel alive. It wasn't just skill that made the eyes of a Greek Kouros seem to follow you, or the smile of a Khmer devota appear to deepen as the light changed. These artists worked in a state of heightened awareness, where every stroke was a meditation, every finished piece a kind of birth. The Japanese even had a term for it, kami no ti, the hand of the gods. When a sculptor achieved this state, the boundary between human and divine blurred. The statue wasn't just an object, it was a manifestation. Perhaps that's why so many traditions held that damaging a sacred image carried cosmic consequences. To break an Egyptian Ushabti figure was to risk disrupting the afterlife journey it was meant to serve. To deface a Buddhist statue wasn't just vandalism, it was an attack on the enlightenment it represented. The artist's role as a channel came with immense responsibility. They weren't just shaping stone, they were shaping reality itself, coaxing the intangible into a form that could be seen, touched, and worshipped. And that's the true magic behind these ancient masterpieces. When we stand before them today, we're not just admiring craftsmanship, we're witnessing moments of transcendence, frozen in time. The tremble of a chisel guided by faith, the breath held as a final curve reveals a god's face, the silent awe when the artist steps back and realizes, this wasn't just me. That's the secret woven into every groove and contour. These sculptors didn't just work with their hands, they worked with their souls, leaving behind not just art, but echoes of the divine. Consider the rhythmic tap of a chisel against stone, not just as labor, but as a kind of mantra. Some scholars now believe that ancient sculptors didn't merely carve stone, they carved through it, using repetitive motions to slip into altered states where the boundaries between artist and deity blurred. Take the zigzags and spirals etched into Paleolithic caves or the dizzying geometric patterns adorning Hindu temples. These aren't just decorations, they're visual echoes of the human brain under trance, what researchers call entoptic phenomena, the shapes we see when our eyes close or our consciousness shifts. Could these patterns be proof that sculptors were channeling visions directly onto the rock? The theory gains weight when you examine the rituals surrounding creation. In ancient Egypt, workshops near temples were sacred spaces where artisans fasted, chanted, and purified themselves before touching stone. The act of carving became a meditation, the steady tap, tap, tap of tools syncing with breath and heartbeat. Similarly, Tibetan monks creating sand mandalas entered deep focus, their meticulous work a form of moving prayer. The parallel is striking. When the mind quiets, the hands seem to move with a wisdom beyond conscious thought. Then there's the sheer physicality of the work. Imagine spending months on a single statue, your muscles memorizing every stroke until the motion becomes automatic. That's not just craftsmanship, it's a gateway to transcendence. The Yoruba of Nigeria describe this state as awo, where the sculptor's hands are guided by ancestral spirits. Even the materials played a role. The flicker of torchlight on cave walls, the scent of incense in temple workshops, the exhaustion of fasting, all could amplify the trance, turning the act of carving into a sacred dialogue with the unseen. What's haunting is how these practices mirror modern neuroscientific findings. Studies on meditating monks and psychedelic experiences reveal the same geometric patterns, lattices, tunnels, spirals, that appear in ancient art. The Lascaux caves, the labyrinthine carvings of Chartres Cathedral, the fractal-like columns drawn in front of Indian homes, all might be snapshots of the human brain touching something beyond the everyday. So next time you see an ancient statue's unblinking gaze or a temple wall's hypnotic designs, ask yourself, are we looking at art or are we looking at ecstasy? These artists might have been more than craftsmen. They were explorers of inner realms, using stone as their map. And the proof isn't just in the patterns. It's in the way these works still pull at something deep within us, as if the trance never really ended. The stone remembers, and if we listen, it might just teach us how to see beyond the surface too. There's a hidden rhythm running through the veins of ancient statues, a silent music of numbers and ratios that turns stone into sacred geometry. Look closely at a Greek kouros, that idealized youth standing with one foot forward, and you'll find the Fibonacci sequence whispering in the curve of his hip, the spiral of his curls. These weren't accidents, they were blueprints of the divine. The Egyptians took it further, etching grids onto their limestone blocks before carving, a strict canon of proportions where every finger, every eyelid had to align with mathematical precision. A pharaoh's statue wasn't just a likeness, it was a living equation, its symmetry mirroring the order of the cosmos itself. Jump to the temples of Khajuraho in India, and you'll see the same principle in motion, but with a different vocabulary. Here, statues were arranged in mandalas, circular patterns representing the universe, their positions calculated to channel energy like spiritual circuitry. The deities' outstretched arms weren't just gestures, they were vectors in a sacred diagram, their angles matching the orbits of planets. Even the slight arch of a brow followed the Toller system, a measurement based on the width of the subject's own thumb, ensuring every detail resonated in harmony. What's fascinating is how these rules crossed continents without contact. Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, that iconic figure with arms outstretched in a circle and square, echoed the same ideals the Egyptians had etched 3,000 years earlier, the human form as a microcosm, its proportions mirroring the perfect balance of creation. But here's the twist: Leonardo thought he was rediscovering lost knowledge, unaware that Hindu sculptors had been using near-identical ratios for centuries, their Shilpa Shastras prescribing divine measurements down to the last millimeter. Why did these cultures, so distant in time and space, converge on the same invisible scaffolding? Perhaps because they understood something we've forgotten. Geometry isn't just mathematics, it's metaphysics. The golden ratio isn't merely pleasing to the eye, it's the fingerprint of growth itself, appearing in seashells and galaxies alike. When a sculptor embedded these ratios into stone, they weren't just making art. They were tuning an instrument, crafting a vessel designed to vibrate with the frequency of the sacred. Take the great Buddha of Kamakura in Japan. His elongated ears aren't stylistic whimsy, they're precise extensions of the hand measurement system, their length matching cosmic intervals thought to align the statue with celestial realms. Or consider the Olmec colossal heads, their flattened noses and thick lips following ratios believed to anchor earthly power. Every culture had its own dialect of this universal language, but the grammar was the same, numbers as bridges between the mundane and the mystical. And that's the real magic here. These sculptors didn't just see proportions as tools, they saw them as prayers. A chisel striking at the perfect angle wasn't just craftsmanship, it was communion. When we stand before these statues today, we're not just seeing art, we're standing in the presence of ancient equations, frozen hymns of stone still singing their silent, sacred math. There's something unsettling about locking eyes with an ancient statue, that moment when you realize the sculptor didn't just depict eyes but vision itself. Across cultures, artists went to extraordinary lengths to make stone seem alive, embedding shells, crystals, or even precious metals into hollow sockets to catch the light just so. The Benin bronzes of West Africa used iron inlays to mimic the wet sheen of a living gaze, while Byzantine icons lined eyes with gold leaf so they'd glitter like fire in candlelight. This wasn't mere realism, it was alchemy. A statue's eyes weren't just for seeing, they were for being seen by, a conduit between mortal and divine. Take the wide-eyed votive statues of Sumer, their pupils stretched into vast, staring circles. These weren't portraits of fear, but of awe figures frozen in the moment of encountering the sacred. Their exaggerated eyes, often inlaid with lapis lazuli, symbolized enlightenment, as if the pupils had dilated to absorb cosmic truths. Similarly, the archaic smile of early Greek Kouroi wasn't just an artistic quirk. It was the hint of a soul awakening, the lips parting as the eyes, originally painted with lifelike detail, seemed to focus on something beyond the physical world. But the true power of these eyes lay in ritual. In Egypt, priests performed the opening of the mouth ceremony, using golden tools to symbolically animate a statue's senses. In Japan, Buddhist sculptors placed mirrors or relics behind crystal eyes during consecration, turning the gaze into a literal window to enlightenment. Even the materials whispered of transcendence: rock crystal for its clarity, obsidian for its depth, mother of pearl for its shimmer, each chosen to reflect not just light but insight. The most haunting examples might be the disembodied eyes found in Indus Valley sites carved from stone or shell. They were likely offerings, left as proxies for human vision to eternally witness the sacred. It's as if these artists understood a profound secret. To carve an eye is to capture the act of seeing itself. And when we stand before these works today, that gaze still holds, not just observing us, but inviting us to step into its field of vision, to be seen by the unseen. The eyes, it seems, were never meant to be passive. They were doors, and somewhere in the silence of stone, they're still waiting for us to walk through. Imagine holding a delicate wax figure in your hands, soft to the touch, easily reshaped by warmth, and knowing that soon it will vanish forever, leaving behind something immortal. That's the paradox of the lost wax method, a process so transformative it feels less like craftsmanship and more like alchemy. From the gleaming Buddhas of Tibet to the intricate brass plaques of Benin, this ancient technique didn't just produce metal sculptures, it enacted a sacred drama of destruction and rebirth, mirroring the spiritual journeys these very statues represented. The steps were deceptively simple, yet each one brimmed with symbolism. An artist would sculpt their vision in beeswax, a material as fleeting as human life, before encasing it in clay. When molten bronze was poured in, the wax would melt away, not just disappearing, but making space for something new, like a soul shedding its earthly shell. The clay mold, once broken open, revealed a radiant figure where emptiness had been. For Buddhist monks, this wasn't just a technical process. It was a physical echo of enlightenment, the moment when illusion burns away to reveal ultimate truth. Even the materials held meaning. Beeswax, a product of nature's harmony, and bronze, an alloy blending earthly copper with celestial tin, became metaphors for unity. Nowhere was this more striking than in the Benin Kingdom's brass plaques. Cast using the lost wax method, they depicted kings and warriors with such precision you can see the texture of their armor, the tension in their muscles. But look closer, these weren't just historical records. The plaques adorned the royal palace as a shimmering tapestry of power, their luminous surfaces believed to channel ancestral energy. When molten metal filled the wax's absence, it wasn't just capturing a likeness, it was invoking presence, turning memory into something tangible. Tibetan artisans took the ritual even further. Before casting a deity, they'd place sacred texts, relics, or even mantras written on birch bark inside the wax model. As the bronze cooled, these offerings became eternally sealed within the statue's heart, literally embedding the divine into metal. The finished figure wasn't just art, it was a vessel, its hollow core now home to wisdom as enduring as the bronze itself. This practice mirrored the Buddhist concept of sunyata, or emptiness, the idea that true substance arises from what's not there. What's extraordinary is how this technique became a global language of the sacred. In ancient Greece, lost wax casting produced the rippling muscles of athletes and gods, their forms so lifelike they seemed to breathe. The Etruscans used it for hauntingly expressive funerary portraits, as if the metal could preserve not just faces but souls. Even the Aztecs employed it for their Zype-Totic statues, clad in flayed skin, a visceral metaphor for renewal through destruction. Every culture that mastered this method seemed to grasp its deeper truth. Creation requires surrender, and that's the real magic of lost wax casting. It wasn't just a way to make sculptures, it was a physical poem about transformation. The wax's disappearance wasn't a loss, it was the key to permanence. When we stand before these bronzes today, we're not just seeing artistry, we're witnessing the moment when fragility became enduring, when the ephemeral gave birth to the eternal. The wax is long gone, but its ghost lingers in every curve, every gleam, every hollow space where the sacred once flowed in. Standing at the foot of an Easter Island moai, craning your neck to meet its hollow gaze, one question presses harder than all others. Why so large? These towering figures weren't merely artistic statements, they were spiritual technology, their scale serving a purpose as deliberate as their carved brows and elongated ears. When the Rapa Nui people quarried volcanic tuff to create these giants, they weren't just shaping stone, they were constructing conduits, their sheer mass designed to anchor mana, the life force of ancestors, into the physical world. The moai's backs faced the sea not out of oversight, but because they were cosmic sentinels, their presence channeling protective energy inland like a spiritual levee. The same principle echoes across continents. Egypt's Great Sphinx, carved from the living bedrock of Giza, wasn't just a guardian of pyramids, it was a harmonic resonator. Recent studies reveal its placement aligns with seismic frequencies, its lion body and human face symbolizing the fusion of earthly and celestial power. Beneath its paws, chambers once pulsed with ritual chants, the vibrations amplified by the statue's bulk to create what researchers now call acoustic archaeology. The Sphinx didn't just watch over the plateau, it sang to it, its form tuning the desert itself to a sacred frequency. But the most startling revelation comes from the ancient Cambodian jungles. The faces of Bayon Temple, each carved into towering sandstone towers, were once gilded with gold leaf. At dawn during equinoxes, sunlight would strike them in sequence, creating a wave of light that rolled across the temple like divine breath. The scale here wasn't for intimidation, it was a canvas for illumination, turning architecture into a celestial clockwork. Even the moai's famous red topknots made from scoria rock weren't mere headdresses, their porous texture acted as a spiritual antenna, drawing energy downward into the statues' bodies. What unites these colossal works is their relationship with the landscape. The moai's Ahu platforms align with solstice sunrises. The Sphinx gazes precisely eastward, greeting the sun god Ra each morning. The Olmec colossal heads of Mesoamerica were positioned over underground rivers, their weight thought to stabilize the Earth's energy. This wasn't arbitrary, it was geomancy, the art of weaving sacred geometry into the land itself. The statue's size made them permanent fixtures in this invisible grid, their mass grounding cosmic forces into the soil like lightning rods for the divine. Perhaps that's why so many cultures shared this impulse toward immensity. When you carve a god at human scale, it remains separate, an object to venerate. But when a deity towers above you, its shadow swallowing the ground at noon, the boundary between worshipper and worship dissolves. You don't just see these statues, you stand inside their presence, enveloped by the same energy that once moved civilizations to haul 90-ton stones across miles without wheels or pulleys. The true mystery isn't how they were built, it's what they were built for. Not as monuments, but as mediums, their stone bodies humming with a charge we're only beginning to measure. Hidden chambers within statues weren't just architectural quirks, they were sacred safes, designed to hold the intangible. Take the Buddha's Ajnisha, that subtle bump atop his head symbolizing enlightenment. To the untrained eye, it's just a stylistic feature, but pry one open, and you might find tightly rolled mantras written on birch bark, each syllable a whispered key to awakening. These weren't mere decorations, they were spiritual batteries, charging the statue with the vibration of countless prayers. In Tibet, consecration rituals involved sealing relics, a strand of hair from a revered lama, a sliver of bone from an enlightened being inside hollow cavities, transforming the sculpture into a living repository of blessings. Christian reliquaries took this concept even further. The gilded bust of Saint Baudime in France isn't just a beautiful face lift its hinged crown, and you'll find a fragment of the saint's skull nestled within, turning the entire piece into a direct conduit to the divine. Medieval artisans didn't just carve these containers, they engineered them with hidden doors and locking mechanisms that turned devotion into an interactive experience. A worshipper could touch the reliquary's surface while knowing the true power lay inches away, separated only by a thin veil of gold, a physical metaphor for faith itself, where the sacred is always just beyond reach yet palpably present. But the most electrifying discovery comes from the Maya. Archaeologists recently uncovered jade statues with hollow cores filled with liquid mercury, a metal so rare and volatile it was considered the sweat of the sun god. This wasn't just opulence, it was alchemy. Mercury's conductive properties may have been harnessed to amplify the statue's spiritual charge, creating what some researchers call ritual circuits. Imagine a priest placing their hands on such a statue during ceremony, the mercury inside subtly shifting, its movement mirroring the flow of unseen energies. The jade exterior, cool and smooth, would mask the liquid fire within a perfect duality of stillness and motion, much like the gods themselves. The irony is striking. These sculptures, so solid and enduring on the outside, were often vessels for the most ephemeral things: ashes, scrolls, droplets of sacred oils. Even the Egyptian shabtis, those small funerary figurines meant to serve the dead in the afterlife, sometimes contained papyrus scraps inscribed with spells, their hollow bellies stuffed with promises of immortality. It's as if every culture understood that true power wasn't in the stone alone, but in what the stone could hold. The statue wasn't just an object of worship, it was a threshold, its hidden chambers whispering that the divine wasn't out there somewhere, it was already here, waiting in the spaces between. And that's the genius of these artists. They knew mystery wasn't the absence of meaning, it was the presence of layers. A child might see a serene Buddha, a devotee might know its head holds scriptures, but only the initiated would understand how both the seen and unseen worked in concert, turning cold stone into a living bridge between worlds. The next time you see an ancient statue, remember, its true power might not be in its face or form, but in the hollows you can't see, the spaces where heaven and earth quietly meet. The first thing you need to know about ancient statues is that they were never meant to be colorless. Walk through any museum today, and you'll see rows of white marble and weathered stone, but that's not how their creators intended them to be seen. These sculptures once blazed with pigment so vibrant, they could stop you in your tracks. Egyptian gods shimmered with skin of gold, and robes dyed the deep blue of the night sky, a hue so precious it was made from crushed lapis lazuli hauled across deserts from Afghanistan's sacred mountains. In China, the terracotta warriors weren't just uniform clay, their armor flared with cinnabar red, a mercury-based pigment believed to hold the secret to immortality. Every color was a language, each shade a direct line to the divine. Consider the paradox of Egyptian blue, one of the first synthetic pigments ever created. To produce it, artisans heated a precise blend of sand, copper, and natron to nearly 1,000 degrees, a process so complex it was considered sacred alchemy. The resulting blue wasn't just decorative, it was cosmological. When painted onto statues of Osiris or the ceilings of tombs, it became the Nile at dusk, the body of the sky goddess Nut, even the waters of creation from which all life emerged. This wasn't mere paint, it was a kind of magic, transforming stone into a mirror of the heavens. But color wasn't just about permanence, sometimes its disappearance held meaning too. The Maya coated their jade sculptures with a thin layer of red hematite, knowing full well the pigment would wear away over centuries. To them, this gradual fading mirrored the soul's journey, starting vibrant in the material world, then slowly dissolving into the spiritual realm as the stone beneath emerged. Similarly, the gold leaf that once covered Greek statues wasn't meant to last forever. As it flaked off, it left traces of divinity behind, like sunlight lingering on skin after sunset. The most striking examples come from India, where temple sculptures were repainted annually during festivals. The old pigments weren't just washed away, they were ritually dissolved in sacred water, carrying prayers into the earth. Each new layer of color wasn't a replacement but a rebirth, a visual echo of the Hindu belief in cyclical time. Even the materials whispered of this connection: saffron yellow made from turmeric, green from powdered malachite, white from ground seashells. Every hue tied the statue back to the living world, a reminder that the divine wasn't separate from nature but woven through it. What's haunting is how these colors transcended mere symbolism. In medieval Europe, the Virgin Mary's ultramarine blue robe painted with that same Afghan lapis wasn't just a stylistic choice. The pigment's cost exceeded gold, making each stroke a literal investment in devotion. Aztec artists used cochineal, a crimson dye from crushed insects, to paint their gods' lips a shocking, almost violent red that seemed to pulse with life. These colors didn't just represent power, they were power condensed into powder and brushed onto stone. So the next time you see an ancient statue, try to picture it as it was meant to be seen, not as a pale ghost of the past, but as a radiant beacon. That faint stain in the folds of a Greek goddess's robe, it was once the purple of Tyrian dye, harvested drop by drop from sea snails, the dull streaks on an Egyptian sarcophagus. They gleamed like the Nile under midday sun. These colors were more than decoration. They were the breath of the gods, the light of the cosmos, the very pulse of belief made visible. And though time has washed most of them away, their echoes still linger. If you know how to look, a raised hand, a curled finger, the slightest tilt of a wrist in sacred sculpture, these details were never accidental. Across cultures, artists chiseled hands with the same precision they gave to faces, because every gesture was a silent sermon carved in stone. Take the Abhaya Mudra of Buddhist statues, that right hand lifted with palm facing outward. It's not just a pose, it's the physical embodiment of fear not, a gesture so potent that ancient texts describe it stopping charging elephants in their tracks. Similarly, the Dhyana Mudra, hands folded in the lap, doesn't merely depict meditation. It's an instruction manual for enlightenment, the thumbs touching to complete an energy circuit between body and cosmos. These weren't artistic flourishes, they were spiritual technology designed to transmit wisdom through imitation. Stand before a Buddha in the Bhumisparsha Mudra, fingertips brushing the earth, and you're not just seeing a scene from his life, you're being shown how to ground yourself in mindfulness. Egyptian sculptors wielded this same power through stillness. A pharaoh's crossed arms aren't just a funeral pose, they mirror Osiris in his resurrection, the left hand clutching a crook, authority, and the right a flail, fertility, together forming a hieroglyph of eternal renewal. Even the rigid posture of these statues served a purpose. The forward-facing stance wasn't artistic limitation but divine calculus, positioning the figure outside mortal time. The slight smile on Old Kingdom statues, that's the serene face described in pyramid texts, a mask of tranquility meant to guide the soul through the afterlife's trials. To stand like these statues was to rehearse immortality. Christian art took gestures skyward literally. The ornate figures in catacomb frescoes, arms raised like wings, didn't just symbolize prayer, they physically mapped the soul's ascent. Byzantine icons of the Virgin Mary often show her hands forming a triangle, thumb and fingertips touching, a silent reference to the Trinity that worshippers could replicate to channel grace. Even the wounds on Christ's hands in medieval sculptures were precisely placed, not random injuries but sacred geometry. The right palm's wound aligned with the left foot's, creating an invisible line that traced the descent of divine mercy. What unites these traditions is the belief that the body could be a prayer book. Hindu temple dancers still learn mudras before reading scriptures, their hands articulating what words cannot. Tibetan monks spend years mastering the exact angle of a deity's fingers in sand mandalas, knowing a single degree's shift could alter the blessing. The Mayans encoded entire constellations into the hand positions of their maize god statues, each finger correlating to a star. These gestures weren't decorations, they were crossroads where the human and divine could touch. Perhaps that's why so many sacred sculptures feel oddly alive despite their stillness. A 10th century Korean bodhisattva's hands, frozen in the Varada mudra of compassion, seem poised to move. An Assyrian guardian spirit's outstretched palm doesn't just ward off evil, it pulls you into its orbit. These artists understood something neuroscience now confirms. Seeing a gesture activates the same brain regions as performing it. That means when you mirror a mudra or stance from an ancient statue, you're not just copying a pose, you're stepping into a centuries-old current of devotion, letting stone teach your bones what words alone cannot. The hands remember what the mind forgets, and somewhere in the space between a curled finger and an open palm, the sacred still waits. What happens when a lion's body meets a human face, or an elephant's head grows from a man's shoulders? These aren't just flights of artistic fancy, they're deliberate acts of sacred alchemy. The Egyptian Sphinx, with its lion's strength and Pharaoh's wisdom, wasn't merely a guardian of pyramids. It was a walking paradox, a creature designed to defy the very categories it straddled. Its hybrid form whispered a profound truth: the divine cannot be contained by a single shape. This same impulse thrived in Mesopotamia, where Lamassu winged bulls with human heads stood sentinel at palace gates. Their 5 legs weren't a sculptor's mistake. Seen from the front, they appeared immobile, but from the side, they seemed to stride forward, a clever illusion blending permanence and motion. These creatures weren't just decorations, they were metaphysical puzzles carved in stone, challenging viewers to reconcile the impossible. Nowhere was this more vivid than in the Hindu pantheon. Ganesha's elephant head atop a human body isn't just whimsy, it's a living allegory. The large ears listen to prayers, the small mouth speaks sparingly, and the broken tusk symbolizes sacrifice, a reminder that wisdom sometimes requires losing something precious. Even his mouse mount carries meaning. The giant deity riding the tiniest creature embodies the coexistence of opposites, the cosmic and the humble intertwined. Similarly, the Garuda of Southeast Asia, part eagle, part man, doesn't just carry Vishnu across the heavens. Its golden wings beat back darkness, its razor talons tearing through illusion. These hybrids weren't stitched together randomly. Every joint, every feather was a deliberate choice, a way to make the abstract tangible. The Aztecs took this further with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent whose coils wove earth and sky into a single being. Its scales weren't just reptilian, they shimmered with iridescent quetzal feathers, a visual hymn to the unity of opposites. The serpent's earthly crawl paired with the bird's celestial flight created a creature that could navigate all realms, its very form a map of the cosmos. Even the Greeks, masters of human form, bent their rules for the centaur, part horse for primal instinct, part man for reason, a walking battleground of duality. What unites these hybrids across cultures is their refusal to be pinned down. The Assyrian griffin, with its eagle's head and lion's body, wasn't just a symbol of royal power. It declared that true authority bridged the ferocity of the land and the foresight of the skies. The Chinese qilin, deer-like yet scaled, its antlers branching like coral, wasn't a random chimera. Its patchwork body was a living omen, appearing only in times of harmony. These creatures didn't just represent gods, they performed their essence, their forms acting out divine attributes in ways pure abstraction never could. Perhaps that's why hybrid beings still captivate us today. They're more than mythical mascots, they're mirrors. In their impossible anatomies, we see our own longing to transcend limits, to be both grounded and boundless, fierce and wise. The next time you encounter one of these stone-born paradoxes, don't just admire the craftsmanship, ask what it's trying to reconcile. Because every lion bird, every serpent deer is an invitation to hold contradictions lightly, to see the sacred in the seams where worlds collide. The hum of wind through a statue's hollow core wasn't an accident, it was an invitation. Across the ancient world, sculptures weren't just meant to be seen, they were engineered to be heard, their very stones tuned to frequencies that could shift consciousness. Take the Greek chori, those graceful maidens standing sentinel in temple courtyards. Their serene smiles hid a secret. Cavities carved into their heads turned passing breezes into ethereal drones, as if the statues themselves were whispering hymns to the gods. This wasn't mere decoration, it was sacred acoustics, a way to blur the line between art and living presence. Nowhere was this more precise than in the Hindu lingam. Struck gently with a mallet, certain Shiva lingams emit a pure, resonant tone exactly 432 Hz, a frequency modern scientists call the cosmic hum for its mathematical ties to planetary vibrations. Coincidence? Hardly. Ancient texts describe rituals where priests would strike these stones in sequence, creating harmonic intervals believed to align worshippers' brainwaves with the rhythm of creation itself. The lingam wasn't just an object of devotion, it was a tuning fork for the soul. But the true masters of sonic sculpture might have been the Maya. Their ball-court markers, often carved with images of macaws or jaguars, were strategically placed to transform the smack of a rubber ball into echoes mimicking those very animals' cries. Imagine the effect during a sacred game, the thud of the ball against stone, suddenly rippling through the courtyard as a jaguar's roar, as if the gods themselves were cheering from the underworld. Archaeologists recently discovered some markers contain hidden chambers that amplify specific frequencies, proving these weren't random quirks of architecture, but deliberate soundscapes designed to transport players and spectators into ritual trance. The deeper mystery lies in how these cultures, continents apart, converged on the same insight. Stone could be a conductor for more than just the visual. Egyptian obelisks, once capped with gold electrum, would have hummed in the desert wind, their vibrations mingling with priests' chants to create a wall of sound. Norse runestones in Scandinavia were often erected near natural echo chambers, where spoken invocations would rebound with uncanny clarity, as if the ancestors were answering. Even Easter Island's moai, their porous volcanic bodies pocked with cavities, may have filtered wind into low, pulsing tones, a soundscape as monumental as the statues themselves. What unites these discoveries is the realization that ancient artists didn't just carve form, they carved resonance. A statue's beauty wasn't confined to its lines and curves. It lived in the way its hollows caught the breeze, the way its mass vibrated under a priest's palm, the way its echoes tricked the ear into hearing the divine. These weren't silent sentinels, they were instruments playing a music so subtle we're only now learning to listen. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson they offer. Sometimes the deepest mysteries aren't hidden in what we see, but in what we've forgotten how to hear. Veiled in stone, the folds of a deity's robe were never just fabric. They were a coded language whispering secrets about the nature of reality itself. When Greek sculptors carved the wet drapery of Aphrodite's chiton clinging to her form, they weren't showing off their technical skill. They were illustrating the paradox of divinity, a goddess simultaneously revealed and concealed, her body both present and transcendent. The way marble rippled like silk under a sculptor's chisel wasn't realism, it was alchemy, turning hard stone into a metaphor for the permeable boundary between mortal and immortal. Byzantine artists took this further with their ivory triptychs, where saints' robes weren't just carved. They were perforated with microscopic holes. Held up to candlelight, gold leaf behind the ivory would glow through these tiny apertures, making the figures seem to radiate from within. This wasn't mere craftsmanship, it was theological theater. The play of light and shadow across the folds became a visual sermon on grace, divine illumination, piercing the veil of earthly existence, just as holiness permeates the material world. Yet some traditions rejected drapery altogether to make an even bolder statement. The Jain Tirthankaras stand naked not for shock value, but as walking manifestos of non-attachment. Their smooth, unadorned bodies, devoid of even the suggestion of clothing, declare complete freedom from worldly illusions. Every poreless surface, every unchiseled fold screams that enlightenment requires shedding not just physical garments, but all the psychic layers we wrap ourselves in. The absence of drapery here isn't emptiness. It's the ultimate fullness, a stone-cut declaration that truth needs no adornment. Compare this to the heavy, cascading robes of medieval Christian saints, their weighty folds like anchors tethering them to humility. The deeper the creases, the more they symbolized the burdens of earthly service. Francis of Assisi's rough-hewn habit, carved with deliberate clumsiness to mirror his rejection of vanity. Meanwhile, in Japan, the flowing sleeves of Kannon statues seem to flutter mid-air, not because the stone is light, but because the artist wanted to capture the bodhisattva's readiness to move at any moment toward suffering. The genius lies in how these details crossed cultures. Hindu temple sculptures used pleats to map energy channels. The precise arrangement of a deity's dhoti could indicate which chakras were activated. Aztec fertility goddesses wore skirts carved with cascading maize kernels, their folds literally bursting with life. Even the rigid pleats of Egyptian gods' kilts were cosmological diagrams, their geometric precision mirroring the ordered layers of creation. So the next time you see an ancient statue, don't just glance at the face, study what it wears or doesn't. Those folds aren't decoration, they're a manifesto. The absence of seams isn't an oversight, it's an argument. Whether heavy with symbolism or pared down to nothing, drapery was never about covering bodies. It was about revealing truths too vast for words. And in the silent language of carved cloth, the sacred still speaks. Eros wasn't just a god of love, he was the spark that bridged flesh and spirit, and ancient sculptors knew this sacred truth better than anyone. Walk through the temples of Khajuraho, where sandstone explodes into scenes of entwined bodies, and you'll realize these aren't mere erotic carvings. They're visual mantras, each union a coded lesson in Tantra, the belief that physical ecstasy could become a ladder to divine communion. the couples frozen in stone aren't just lovers, they're yogis, their poses mirroring sacred geometry, their intimacy a ritual as precise as any prayer. Even the temple's layout whispers this philosophy. The most explicit figures sit high above eye level, forcing pilgrims to crane their necks upward, a literal elevation of desire toward the spiritual. Compare this to the Greek Kouros, that idealized youth standing nude in the sunlight. His taut muscles and balanced proportions weren't just aesthetic triumphs, they were maps to a higher state. The sculptor Polycleto's Canon, a treatise on perfect ratios, claimed the body's harmony mirrored the cosmos itself. When athletes like Diagoras of Rhodes commissioned victory statues, they weren't celebrating vanity. They were offering their physiques as votives, their sweat-slicked skin transformed into altars of discipline and devotion. Even the slight forward step of these figures carried meaning. The tension between motion and stillness echoed the soul's journey between earthly and divine realms. Venus, rising from her seashell in Botticelli's painting, has older sisters in stone Aphrodite statues whose clinging drapery teased more than it concealed. The Romans called this the Venus Pudica pose, one hand modestly covering her body while the other extended in welcome. This wasn't prudishness, it was sacred theater. The drapery's wet transparency revealed that true divinity couldn't be hidden, while her gesture invited worshippers to approach Eros as a path, not a distraction. Even her missing arms in the Venus de Milo aren't an accident of time. Their absence forces us to focus on her spiraling posture, a visual metaphor for the soul's ascent through desire. The real surprise lies in how these traditions converged across oceans. In Japan, the Shunga prints of coupled deities weren't pornography but esoteric diagrams, their vivid colors corresponding to energy channels in tantric practice. The Hindu Mithuna sculptures at Konark Temple show celestial musicians mid-embrace, their instruments pressed between bodies, a literal harmony of flesh and spirit. Even the biblical Song of Solomon, with its unabashed celebration of lovemaking, was carved into medieval church facades, reminding worshippers that the body's joy could be a hymn. What unites these works is their rejection of shame. The Yoruba Orisha Shango dances with thunderbolts in one hand and an erect phallus in the other, not as vulgarity, but as raw life force. The Tibetan Yabyum statues of deities in union aren't scandalous. They're visualizations of wisdom and compassion merging. These artists understood something modern Puritans often forget. To carve the body in its fullness isn't to degrade the spirit, it's to honor the vessel that carries it. Sensuality, when wielded with sacred intent, becomes a chisel, cracking open the stone of ordinary perception to reveal the light within. So the next time you see an ancient nude, don't look away. Lean in, that curve of hip, that arch of spine, they're not just anatomy. They're invitations to remember that transcendence doesn't mean escaping the body, but awakening to its deepest mysteries. After all, if the divine could take human form, why wouldn't it blush, tremble, and sigh? Guardians of thresholds stand at the edge of worlds, not just as decorations, but as living filters between chaos and order. Take Japan's Neo statues, their muscles coiled like storm clouds, faces twisted into primal snarls, flanking temple gates. These wrathful giants aren't mere scarecrows for evil spirits. Their bulging eyes and bared fangs act as spiritual lightning rods, drawing malevolent forces toward themselves so the purified may pass. Yet turn the corner, and you'll glimpse their hidden profiles, softened brows, lips hinting at smiles, a revelation that the fiercest protectors often harbor boundless compassion. This duality wasn't accidental. It was a masterclass in sacred psychology, teaching devotees that the path to enlightenment requires facing shadows before embracing light. Half a world away, medieval cathedral gargoyles performed similar alchemy. Perched on rainspouts, their grotesque forms, part bat, part demon, part crumbling nightmare, weren't just architectural flair. Their gaping mouths channeled more than rainwater. They symbolically swallowed harmful energies, their very ugliness a sieve separating the sacred from the profane. Stonemasons carved these creatures during plagues and wars, embedding them with apotropaic magic, the belief that horror could repel horror. Yet inside the cathedral, delicate statues of saints bathed in stained glass light offered solace, completing the cycle. The gargoyles' chaos outside making the peace within feel earned, not given. The genius lies in their placement. Neo-statues always stand in pairs, one mouth open to pronounce A, the primal beginning of all sounds in Sanskrit, while its counterparts closed lips utter Un, the sacred syllable of completion. Together, they frame the temple entrance as a cosmic breath, inhaling impurities and exhaling blessings. Similarly, Gothic gargoyles cluster at transitions where nave meets transept, where shadow meets stained glass radiance. Their positions calculated by geomantic charts to amplify the building's energy flow. Even their materials whispered of this purpose. The Neo's camphor wood, aromatic and insect repellent, or the gargoyle's limestone, porous enough to absorb prayers from the air. What unites these guardians across cultures is their role as spiritual airlocks. The Aztec Tzitzitl skeletons, poised atop pyramids with skeletal grins, didn't just frighten, their hollow eyes mirrored the stars, reminding climbers that death was the threshold to celestial realms. Hindu Devarapalas, clutching maces at shrine entrances, bear third eyes marking them as seers of both visible and invisible dangers. These sentinels understood a profound truth. True sacred spaces aren't just protected from darkness, they transform it. The gargoyle's snarl becomes a grin when seen from the safety of the pew. The Neo's roar softens to a hum once you cross into the temple's embrace. Perhaps that's why these figures still arrest us today. They're more than art, they're arguments carved in stone, insisting that holiness isn't the absence of chaos, but the courage to meet it. Their grotesque faces and graceful hidden profiles teach us that every spiritual journey begins by acknowledging the monsters at the door, not to defeat them, but to recognize them as the first guardians of the sacred. There's a quiet power in a sculpture left unfinished, a rawness that feels more alive than any polished perfection. Michelangelo's slaves, those tormented figures forever straining to free themselves from marble, weren't abandoned due to lack of skill. Their unfinished state was the point. Emerging from the stone as if mid-creation, they embody the eternal struggle of spirit wrestling with matter, a visual hymn to the idea that true divinity lies in the becoming, not the completion. The chisel marks left visible aren't mistakes. They're footprints of the sacred struggle, a reminder that even the greatest masters never fully captured the ineffable. This philosophy finds its purest expression in Zen Buddhism's unfinished Buddha statues, deliberately left with rough surfaces and partially defined features. These works honor wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and transience. A Buddha with an unpolished face isn't laziness. It's a meditation on the illusion of finality. The sculptor's hand pauses not because the work is done, but because it's enough, a testament to the belief that enlightenment isn't a static state, but an ongoing dance between form and formlessness. Even the grain of the wood or stone is left exposed, whispering that nature's imperfections are part of the sacred design. Then there's the haunting mystery of Egypt's reserve heads, those strikingly minimalist sculptures from the Old Kingdom. Stripped of intricate detail, no carved hair, no ornate headdresses, they were never meant to be portraits. Their smooth, almost abstract faces were a spiritual failsafe. Ancient Egyptians believed too much realism could trap a soul, binding it to the earthly realm. By leaving these heads intentionally vague, artists created vessels flexible enough to house the departed in the afterlife without imprisoning them. The lack of detail wasn't an omission, it was an act of liberation, ensuring the soul could move freely between worlds. What unites these incomplete masterpieces across cultures is their rebellion against the cult of perfection. The Yoruba Abiku figures of West Africa, left deliberately rough to appease restless spirits, or the Native American story poles with blank spaces for future generations to carve. These works acknowledge that mysticism isn't a finished puzzle, but a living conversation. Even the Greek archetype sculptures, left partially embedded in their blocks, were thought to hold greater power precisely because they existed between realms, neither fully stone nor fully divine. Perhaps that's why these works resonate so deeply today. In a world obsessed with completion, they offer a radical alternative. The sacred lives in the cracks, the rough edges, the unchiseled spaces where the imagination takes over. An unfinished statue isn't a failure, it's an invitation, a doorway left ajar for the divine to enter on its own terms. And sometimes, the most profound truths aren't found in the answers we carve, but in the questions we leave standing. Light wasn't just something that fell on ancient statues, it was a co-conspirator, carefully choreographed to transform stone into theater. Step into an Egyptian temple at dusk, and you'd witness the alchemy firsthand. Priests would light oil lamps in sequence, their flames licking the gilded edges of statues until the gods seemed to breathe in the flickering glow. The gold leaf on Ra's headdress wouldn't just shine, it would pulse like the sun itself, while the obsidian pupils of Hathor's eyes caught the light with uncanny precision, following worshippers like a living gaze. This wasn't illumination, it was animation, a sacred trick played on the senses to blur the line between idol and deity. The Greeks took this further with their cunning use of chiaroscuro centuries before the Renaissance claimed the technique. The Parthenon's friezes, now muted in museum lighting, were originally drenched in bold pigments, deep blues and crimsons that created dramatic shadows under torchlight. As evening processions wound through the Acropolis, the dancing flames would make the marble horses' muscles twitch and the gods' cloaks billow in an eternal wind. Even the folds of Athena's peplos were carved at precise angles to catch the solstice sunrise, transforming her into a radiant column of light on the year's longest day. Sculptors didn't just accommodate light, they weaponized it, turning celestial events into divine epiphanies. Medieval stonemasons elevated this to high science. Chartres Cathedral's south porch statues stand rigid for most of the year until the winter solstice, when the low-angled sun slices through the nave. Suddenly, the Magi's faces soften with wonder, their stone lips parting as light pools in their eye sockets like tears. The effect lasts precisely 17 minutes, long enough for a hymn, a prayer, a shiver down the spine. Across Europe, cathedral builders embedded these light triggers like Easter eggs, rose windows that cast kaleidoscopic prophecies at equinoxes, crypts where a single shaft of sunlight would strike a saint's tomb on their feast day. The stones weren't just positioned for structural integrity, but for celestial dialogue. What's astonishing is how these practices mirrored each other across unconnected cultures. At Angkor Wat, the pre-dawn light during spring equinox climbs the temple's central tower to illuminate a hidden carving of Vishnu, a moment modern pilgrims still gather to witness. In Persia's Nasir al-Mulk Mosque, stained glass transforms morning light into a mosaic that carpets the prayer hall in liquid jewels. The builders of Newgrange in Ireland engineered a passage tomb so precise that the winter solstice sunrise still creeps down its 60-foot tunnel to kiss the inner chamber 5,000 years later. Each of these sites shares an unspoken understanding. Light isn't incidental to sacred space, it's the language the divine uses to say, "I am here." The real magic lies in the transitions. Egyptian priests didn't flood their temples with light, they doled it out gradually, letting initiates' eyes adjust as mysteries unfolded. A Byzantine church's nave would darken toward the altar, drawing worshippers forward like moths to a flame. This careful orchestration of shadow wasn't just theatrical, it was pedagogical, teaching the soul to move from blindness to revelation. Even the play of candlelight on a Buddha's smile follows this logic. The flicker makes the expression seem to shift between serenity and knowing amusement, as if enlightenment itself can't be pinned to a single state. Perhaps that's why these light effects still mesmerize us today, standing in the Pantheon as the oculus's beam sweeps across the marble floor, or watching sunset turn Borobudur stupas into golden bells. We're not just seeing clever engineering. We're participating in an ancient conversation between stone and sky, where shadows aren't absences of light, but its dance partners. The architects knew something we often forget, that the sacred reveals itself not in steady glare, but in the interplay between darkness and dawn, between what we can see and what we sense is just beyond the light's reach. Restoring a sacred statue isn't just an act of repair, it's a philosophical crossroads. Take the debate surrounding Angkor Wat's celestial dancers, their delicate features softened by centuries of monsoon rains and tropical heat. To scrub away the patina of time might reveal the crisp lotus petals and intricate jewelry the Khmer sculptors originally carved, but it would also erase the visible breath of centuries, the slow dialogue between stone and sky that transformed these figures into something more than art. The cracks aren't flaws, they're wrinkles in a face that's witnessed dynasties rise and fall, each fissure a stanza in an epic poem of endurance. This tension plays out dramatically at Italy's Basilica of St. Francis, where Giotto's frescoes were meticulously cleaned in the 1990s. The restoration revealed vibrant blues and golds hidden under layers of candle soot, but some scholars mourned the loss of the soft, shadowy haze that had deepened the spirituality of the scenes for generations. The soot wasn't just dirt, it was a filter of devotion, the accumulated residue of countless prayers whispered in candlelit darkness. Similarly, when laser cleaning stripped the blackened surface from Greece's Parthenon marbles, the freshly exposed marble seemed almost too bright, too new, as if the weight of history had been power washed away. Yet there's a compelling counterargument from places like Kyoto's Kinkaku-ji, the Golden Pavilion. Burned down by a fanatic in 1950, its meticulous reconstruction didn't just replicate the original, it honored the building's essence as a living symbol of resilience. The gold leaf reapplied to its walls doesn't pretend the fire never happened. It asserts that beauty can rise from ashes without erasing the scars. This philosophy guides the careful work on Easter Island's Maui, where conservators use indigenous techniques to stabilize the statues without disguising their weathering. The goal isn't to freeze them in time, but to prolong their conversation with it. The most profound examples come from Japan's kintsugi tradition, where broken pottery is repaired with gold-laced lacquer, making fractures gleam rather than disappear. Applied to sacred statues, this approach transforms damage into a new layer of meaning. A 12th century Jizo Basatsu in Nara, its face eroded to near anonymity, wasn't recarved. It was stabilized exactly as found, its blurred features now radiating a different kind of wisdom, the serenity of surrender to time's passage. What's emerging is a third path beyond the binary of ruin or restoration, one that listens to the object itself. At Mexico's Teotihuacan, conservators analyzing the pyramid of the feathered serpent discovered that its original builders had repeatedly replastered and repainted the structure, treating preservation as an ongoing ritual. Today's experts follow that lead, using reversible techniques that future generations can refine or remove. It's humility disguised as science, an acknowledgement that we're temporary stewards of these works, not their final interpreters. Perhaps the answer lies in asking what these sculptures need to continue their sacred work. A Buddha statue in Laos, its arms shattered by war, wasn't reconstructed. The fragments were arranged on an altar exactly as found, the absence speaking louder than any restoration could. Meanwhile, the Vatican's Piet, as sits behind bulletproof glass after a 1972 attack, its protection a silent testament to the wounds it carries. Both approaches honor the same truth. Sacred art isn't frozen in the past, it's in constant dialogue with the present, and its scars are part of the conversation. The challenge isn't to erase time's marks, but to decide which ones are still speaking, and which we're finally ready to let rest. A perfect replica of an ancient statue might fool the eye, but it rarely fools the soul. Consider the case of the Getty Kuros, that sleek, smiling youth carved from pale marble. On paper, it ticks every box: the right mineral composition, the correct weathering patterns, even the faintest traces of ancient tool marks. Yet something about it feels hollow. Scholars have debated its authenticity for decades, not because the craftsmanship is lacking, but because standing before it doesn't stir the same quiet awe as an undisputed original. It's as if the statue knows it's an imposter, its silence heavy with the absence of centuries of whispered prayers and anointing oils. This is what philosopher Walter Benjamin called aura, the uncanny presence that clings to an original artwork, born from its unique history and ritual life. A three-dimensional scan can capture every crack and contour of a medieval Madonna, but it can't replicate the warmth of votive candles that once flickered at her feet, or the imprint of pilgrims' fingertips worn smooth against her robes. That intangible charge isn't just nostalgia, it's the residue of belief itself, layered into the object like patina. When a 12th century monk chiseled a saint's face, he wasn't just shaping stone, he was weaving a tapestry of devotion, each strike of the hammer a stitch in time. A modern printer might spit out an identical form, but without that sacred context, it's just a husk. Take the Buddhist statues of Nara, Japan. Many have survived fires, wars, and earthquakes, their surfaces blackened by smoke and their limbs repaired with centuries-old joinery. To believers, these scars aren't flaws, they're proof of endurance, physical manifestations of the Buddha's promise to withstand suffering. A flawless replica might gleam prettily under gallery lights, but it wouldn't carry the weight of those trials, the quiet authority of an object that has witnessed. The same principle applies to the sacred bronzes of Benin, ritually bathed in sacrificial oils until their surfaces developed a living sheen no chemical patina can mimic. Yet there's a tantalizing paradox here. Some replicas do seem to gather aura over time. The Eye's grand shrine in Japan has been rebuilt identically every 20 years for over a millennium, each iteration considered as sacred as the last because the act of renewal itself is the ritual. Similarly, Tibetan sand mandalas are destroyed moments after completion, teaching that the sacred lies not in permanence, but in the labor of devotion. Perhaps aura isn't just about age, it's about intention. When a team of experts recreated the shattered Buddhas of Bamiyan using original techniques and local materials, the villagers reported feeling the same reverence for the new figures. The stones weren't ancient, but the hands that shaped them remembered. This raises a haunting question: can aura be manufactured? In Florence, conservators repairing earthquake-damaged frescoes found that using historically accurate pigments and brushes seemed to restore the artwork's spiritual resonance, as if the materials carried their own memory. Meanwhile, high-tech replicas of Lascaux's cave paintings, down to the microscopic texture of the rock, have moved visitors to tears, suggesting that precision, when paired with context, can sometimes bridge the gap. The difference lies in whether the copy seeks to deceive or to honor. A forgery trades on stolen authority, while a faithful reproduction can become a vessel for new meaning, like a hymn translated into another language but sung with equal fervor. In the end, the power of these objects may lie in what we bring to them as much as what they contain. The original Shroud of Turin and its countless replicas provoke the same awe in believers because the true magic was never in the linen, it was in the gaze of those who looked upon it with faith. A statue's aura isn't locked in its stone or bronze, it's kindled in the space between the artifact and the human heart, and that's something no scanner can replicate. Contemporary artists may work with steel and algorithms instead of stone and chisels, but the ancient conversation between matter and mysticism continues. It's just traded hieroglyphs for holograms. Anish Kapoor's Dissension, a swirling black whirlpool installed in gallery floors, doesn't just reference water's primal power, it reenacts the Hindu myth of the Vishnu Purana, where the universe spirals into being from dark, churning waters. The piece isn't a metaphor, it's a ritual. Visitors circle its vortex, their reflections fractured in the turbulent surface, mirroring the way pilgrims once circumambulated sacred lingams. Kapoor's use of synthetic materials, high-tech polymers that mimic infinite depth updates an old truth. The sacred doesn't live in the material itself, but in how the material makes us feel the unseen. Zaha Hadid's architecture takes this further, bending concrete into forms that seem to defy physics. Her Haydar Aliyev Center in Azerbaijan doesn't just echo organic curves, it dances with the fluid geometry of Sufi calligraphy, where letters stretch like limbs in ecstatic prayer. The building's undulating walls, devoid of right angles, aren't just aesthetic triumphs. They're spatial mantras, guiding movement the way temple labyrinths once directed devotees toward enlightenment. Hadid's parametric designs, generated by algorithms, might seem light years from hand-carved stupas, but they share a core principle. Sacred space isn't static, it's a current, and the body must move through it to understand. Even in Olafur Eliasson's The Weather Project, where a giant artificial sun bathed Tate Modern's Turbine Hall in amber light, we see the ghost of Egyptian sun cults reborn. Visitors lay on the floor like sunbathers, their shadows merging into the installation's mirrored ceiling, a secular reenactment of Ra's journey through the underworld, where souls dissolved into the divine. Eliasson's work proves mysticism hasn't vanished. It's migrated from stone to immersive environments, using mist, light, and reflection to trigger the same awe that once flowed from cathedral rose windows. The real surprise lies in how these artists collaborate with ancient traditions they've never formally studied. Japanese sculptor Kohei Nawa's Pix-Cell series, encasing objects in glass beads, unintentionally mirrors the Kirikane technique of medieval Buddhist artisans who gilded statues with layered gold leaf to suggest radiance from within. Nawa's beads refract light like prismatic halos, achieving the same effect through nanotechnology. Meanwhile, American artist Teresita Fernandez's golden installations, woven from thousands of metal threads, channel the Incan belief that gold was the sweat of the sun, not as appropriation, but as a kind of ancestral resonance, proving certain symbols circle the globe like migratory birds. This isn't revivalism, it's evolution. Where ancient sculptors used stone's permanence to outlast time, today's artists embrace ephemerality. Christo and Jean-Claude's wrapped landscapes vanish after weeks, echoing Zen sand mandalas. Ai Weiwei's sunflower seeds, millions of porcelain husks scattered underfoot, recall the Buddhist teaching of impermanence, each seed hand painted by artisans in Jingdezhen, linking mass production to lost traditions of devotional labor. The materials change, but the questions remain. How do we give form to the invisible? How do we make the sacred tangible? perhaps that's the ultimate lesson here. When Kapoor fills a gallery with crimson wax my red homeland, or Hadid designs a mosque that seems to melt into the dunes of Qatar, they're not just making art, they're continuing a dialogue that began when the first human pressed a palm into wet clay and wondered, could this hold the divine? The tools are different, but the longing is the same, and in that unbroken thread from stone to steel, from chisel to code, we find proof that mysticism never dies. It just finds new skins. Standing before an ancient sculpture in a museum, it's easy to feel like you're on the wrong side of a locked door, admiring the artifact but missing the key to its deeper resonance. The good news, that key isn't lost, it's waiting in your hands. Start with something as simple as shifting your gaze. Next time you visit a gallery, try this. Instead of scanning labels first, let your eyes linger on a statue's hands. Notice how the fingers curl. Are they forming a mudra, like the Buddha's reassurance gesture? Or observe the drapery's folds, imagining the sculptor's chisel pausing to emphasize a sacred number or cosmic rhythm. This sacred gaze isn't about expertise, it's about attention. The Yoruba people of Nigeria call this oju in the inner eye, a way of seeing that looks beyond form to the energy within. For a more immersive encounter, borrow a practice from medieval monks. Sit quietly before a sculpture and let it speak to you. In Kyoto's Ryon Jai temple, visitors meditate before a single stone in the rock garden, allowing its stillness to mirror their own. You don't need a Zen master to try this, any museum bench will do. Set a timer for 5 minutes, breathe deeply, and notice how the statue's presence shifts as your mind settles. Does the Egyptian scribe's slight smile seem knowing? Does the Virgin Mary's outstretched hand feel more like an invitation? Ancient artists carved these works to be experienced, not just examined. If you're craving tactile connection, seek out a stone carving workshop. Many cities offer introductory classes where you'll learn to coax shapes from soapstone or alabaster materials, soft enough for beginners yet dense enough to teach respect for the medium. As your hands grow blistered and your forearms ache, you'll gain visceral insight into what it took to shape the Moai or the Parthenon friezes. The act of carving unlocks an intimate dialogue with the stone. You'll quickly learn that the material has its own will veins that split unexpectedly, hidden hardness that defies your tools. It's humbling, thrilling, and strangely spiritual. For those who prefer armchair exploration, David Friedberg's The Power of Images reveals how statues across cultures have provoked tears, kisses, and even violence, proof of their enduring emotional charge. Pair it with documentaries like The Mystery of Easter Island, which follows archaeologists recreating the Moai's journey from quarry to coast using only ancient methods. Or dive into Cave of Forgotten Dreams, Werner Herzog's haunting film about the 30,000-year-old sculptures in France's Chauvet Cave, their animal forms flickering to life under torchlight. The most surprising portal to this world might be in your own neighborhood. Visit a cemetery with old stone angels, or wander a city's historic district tracing the gargoyles' eroded faces. These everyday sacred sculptures carry whispers of the same mysticism that animated temple idols. Photograph them at different times of day. Notice how dawn light sharpens a saint's frown, or how twilight softens a lion's snarl. Post your discoveries online with #StoneWhispers. You'll join a global community decoding these silent messages. What all these approaches share is the shift from spectator to participant. When you meditate before a statue, you're not just admiring art, you're continuing the ritual it was made for. When you carve stone, you're not just learning a skill, you're conversing with every sculptor who ever lifted a chisel. The mysticism isn't locked in the past, it's alive in the act of engagement, waiting for anyone willing to look, touch, or simply sit still long enough to listen. As we've journeyed from primitive carvings to digital recreations, one truth endures: stone remains humanity's most enduring medium for confronting the ineffable. These legacies in stone aren't mere artifacts, they're frozen prayers, crystallized visions, and bridges to realms beyond our senses. The next time you encounter an ancient sculpture, pause. Let its silent language of symbolism, proportion, and texture speak across millennia. Share in the comments which mystical sculpture resonates most with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries. From the Venus of Willendorf's primal curves to the serene gaze of the Buddha at Kamakura, these works are more than history, they're mirrors. They reflect our timeless yearning to grasp the intangible, to carve order from chaos, to freeze a moment of transcendence in unyielding rock. Every chip of the chisel was a leap of faith, a belief that something as solid as stone could hold something as fleeting as the divine. And somehow, against all odds, it worked. These sculptures outlived empires, survived wars, and crossed oceans to sit quietly in museum halls, still pulsing with the energy of their creators' hands. What's remarkable isn't just their survival, but their stubborn refusal to become relics. A Maya stela covered in glyphs isn't just a record of kings, it's a challenge to decipher its secrets. The missing arms of the Venus de Milo aren't just damage, they're an invitation to imagine what she once held. Even the cracks in Easter Island's moai tell stories of resilience, of time's passage, of the earth itself shifting beneath their feet. These imperfections aren't flaws, they're proof of dialogue between the artwork and the ages. So the next time you stand before an ancient statue, try this. Don't just look at it, let it look back. Notice how the light catches the curve of a cheekbone, how shadow pools in the folds of a robe. Imagine the hands that shaped it, the prayers whispered around it, the centuries it has witnessed. These sculptures were never meant to be passive objects. They were designed to provoke, to comfort, to question. The great Sphinx still asks its riddles. The bodhisattvas of Angkor still offer their smiles. The gargoyles of Notre Dame still leer from their perches, reminding us that the sacred and the grotesque have always been intertwined. And this conversation isn't over. Contemporary artists still wrestle with the same questions ancient sculptors did: how to give form to the formless, how to make the invisible visible. Whether working in marble or virtual reality, the goal remains the same: to create something that outlasts us, that speaks to futures we'll never see. That's the real magic of these legacies in stone. They remind us that creativity is the closest thing we have to immortality. So tell us which sculpture speaks to you. Is it the haunting eyes of an Egyptian funerary mask, or the intricate dance of Shiva Nataraja, the quiet strength of a Romanesque Madonna, or the raw power of an Olmec colossal head? Drop your favorites in the comments and let's keep this conversation alive. And if you've enjoyed this journey through the mysteries of stone, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more ancient wonders to explore together. Until next time, keep looking closer. The stones still have so much to say.